Hello, everyone. I'm just going to give everybody a minute to kind of filter in. Kate, can you give me a confirmation that you can see my slide?
Yep, looks great.
Awesome, thank you. Great. Okay, hello, everyone. Welcome to the How Good Innovation Online series. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really looking forward to our next hour of discussion. As a way of introducing one another, if our audience members would like to put their name, where they're based, if you'd like, you can put your role or the company you work for in the chat, and that way we can get to know each other a little bit, even though we won't have the opportunity to introduce ourselves formally to one another. My name is Leah Wolf. I'm the head of regenerative education and content here at How Good. I'm currently located in Golden, Colorado, and I'm so excited to be speaking with two leaders in the carbon and eco-labeling space. Today, we're going to be talking with these innovators about how organizations can use eco and carbon labels as tools for transparency and build them into their action plans for reducing their carbon footprint and overall ecological impact. So thank you so much. I hope you'll join me in welcoming Jennifer McKnight, who is the co-founder of Airly Foods, and Sandra Noonan, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer for JustSalad. I hope you'll also be able to join us for our upcoming session on December 16th. Joining us will be Elizabeth Whitlow, who is the Executive Director of the Regenerative Organic Alliance, and Mary Linnell Simmons, who is the Director of Marketing and External Relations for Fairtrade America. And they'll be sharing with us strategies for designing and contextualizing eco-labels to maximize impact. So just to run through a quick agenda for our time together today, we'll finish up our introduction. We'll have a 30 to 35-minute conversation with our panelists. Then, depending on time, we'll have the opportunity for some community discussion. And finally, we'll come back for a Q&A with the speakers before we wrap up at the top of the hour. Okay. Thank you so much for being here, everyone. Thank you especially to our two panelists, Sandra and Jen. Really appreciate the two of you taking the time out of your busy schedules to join our community and to talk about your experience as early adopters of carbon and eco labels in the CPG space. And of course, we have excuse me. I would love if you guys could both give a quick introduction of yourselves, just like 1 to 2 minutes about a little bit about what you're working on, a little bit about what you're excited about in your organization. So we can start with Sandra if you'd like, and then Jen, you can go right after.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Nice to be here. My name is Sandra. I'm Chief Sustainability Officer at JustSalad. JustSalad is a restaurant, fast casual restaurant concept founded in 2006. Our mission is to make everyday health and everyday sustainability possible. And we are located in 6 US states currently, 50 locations. And in addition to being a pioneer of carbon labeling, we also run the world's largest reusable bowl program. So we're very, very committed to the concept of reuse and zero waste. And yeah, I'm happy to discuss all of that today. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much.
Hi there. So Jen McKnight, one of the co-founders of Airly Foods. So we recently launched Airly crackers. They're the world's first climate positive crackers. So each box actually removes greenhouse gas from the air. We are under Bright Future Foods, which is the newest division of Post Holdings. So very excited to be here today.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And just as a note to our audience members, if you have any questions throughout our panel discussion, please feel free to pop them in the chat. And if you weren't here at the beginning, when I invited everyone to go ahead and put your name and where you're located in the chat, maybe your role or your company, I think it's a great way for us to connect a little bit, even though we are conducting this event virtually. So I'd love to get started off to talk a little bit about maybe your recommendations in terms of educating the average consumer to kind of help them grasp not only the concept of carbon labeling, but also the specific terminology like kilograms of CO2 equivalent when you're labeling your menu items or when you're labeling your products. And either of you can jump in, or I can choose who goes first.
Please, Jen.
Happy to jump in. So I think it's an excellent question, and it's one that we really struggled with, given that our whole positioning is around being a climate-friendly snack. So some of the things that we've done, and I won't say that they're right, but some of the things that we've done to try to make it a little bit more relatable, we do put our carbon footprint on pack. And we try to introduce it in a way that clearly communicates carbon, but also gives some context for what the heck that means. So on each of our pack, we actually say the box you're holding in your hand, just removed, and depending on the flavor, it'll be somewhere between 18 to 21 grams of CO2 from the air. And then that's like cleaning, and again, depending on which of the products you have, between 2,500 to 2,900 beach balls worth of fresher air. So we were trying to make it a little bit more relatable, given that folks don't necessarily know what to do with that CO2. I'll say the other thing that's been interesting too, just going through this journey, is as we were testing different potential ways to communicate it, I think one of the other ahas for us was carbon just does not work in the food space. Every single time we tested anything that had to do with carbon, people took it to automotive. So we never talk about carbon without first talking about greenhouse gases, because that seems to be the way to communicate it, where folks have highest awareness and at least kind of know the space you're in. So I won't say we got it right, but that's kind of how we've been doing it to try to at least ground in CO2 removal, but make it a little bit more relatable.
Totally. Sandra, what kind of communicating have you been doing with your consumers about carbon labeling?
So we approach communicating about carbon labeling with the spirit of humility, which I think Jen also was channeling, because this is very new territory. And so we do a couple of things. So we, in 2020, launched carbon labels on our menu, and they're these, a unit, kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent with the corresponding quantity. And that is clearly not enough, given the lack of carbon literacy in our culture right now. So we said context, context, context. How can we put these numbers in context? And one solution that we're testing, or that we have in our online ordering system, is a comparison to a beef patty. So we are picking on the hamburger, and when you select a salad on orderjustsalad.com, you'll see the salad and then the nutrition facts label, which we're all quite familiar with, on the right of the salad, and under that you'll see the carbon facts. So we will then say your salad is X% lower in carbon footprint than that of a beef patty, quarter-pound beef patty. So we try to compare it to a food that everyone is familiar with, that is outside our menu, to keep it separate and kind of clean. So that's one thing we do. We also just talk about it. So on justsalad.com/carbon label, we just very kind of candidly explain to our customers, like, what are we doing here? Why did we do it? What does it mean? And that is, I think that's essential too. Just like state your reasons up front. And then finally, we created a climatarian menu. We said, okay, not everyone is going to want to decipher these numbers. Not everyone's going to sit there and parse carbon labels. So how do we give you a shortcut? And we created a climatarian menu where we curate our lowest emissions items. And we say, if you want to eat with climate in mind, here's the climatarian menu. So those are, I would say, 3 things we do to communicate and contextualize these very new data points.
Yeah, so it sounds like both of you are obviously within your organizations having, doing a lot of thinking, having a lot of conversations about the best way to contextualize these kinds of labels. But I wonder if we could even go back a step and talk a little bit about how you decide as an organization that it's worth your time and effort to do carbon labeling in the first place.
Yeah, I can jump in. So for Airly, in some ways it was obvious, in some ways it wasn't. So our mission at Airly is to reverse climate change through food. You know, admittedly, a big, hairy, audacious goal. And really, crackers are the first product that we're launching to try to accomplish that. And so as we thought about like, how do we start to create a language? How do we start to create like an explanation of what we're doing? And then also give the consumer enough proof points to know that greenwashing is not happening here. Really doing the life cycle analysis, doing it well, and clearly communicating it to a consumer started to become something that for us was a non-negotiable. And I think the other thing for us as we considered how to bring this idea to life was an underlying consumer insight that as we got into talking with folks, what we were uncovering is this is a big, scary topic, you know, climate change in general. And fundamentally, I, as an individual, do not believe that I can have an impact. You know, that became really clear really quickly that that was a barrier we were going to have to overcome as we started to introduce this idea of climate-friendly snacking. And so, you know, I look to Tom's shoes. For me, I think they're one of the best examples of somebody who really telegraphically explains the impact of your choice. If I buy a pair of Tom's shoes, I know a child in South America gets a pair of shoes. Buy one, give one. Got it. And we were trying to be that telegraphic with Airly so that when you pick up this box of crackers, you know the direct impact you've made. And so in that way, carbon becomes our metric. And so that's why for us, it was so important that we actually not just say we're climate friendly, but put it on the pack itself. And then to our earlier discussion, put it on there, start to drive that discussion, but also provide the context that helps you understand like what those, you know, 21 grams of CO2 really mean.
That's interesting. On the JustSalad side, we started carbon labeling in a spirit of learning. It wasn't, I've been asked, like, was this a result of extensive consumer research saying that your customers want carbon labeling? No, absolutely not. We were looking for a new, like, very candidly, we were looking for a new way to talk about food and climate change. We know that 26% of global greenhouse gas emissions come from the food system. And as a brand, JustSalad, that has championed reuse for 16 years through this Reusable Bowl program, we felt that we wanted to talk about food in a way that was as innovative and fresh and new as our Reusable Bowl program. So what is totally different? And we said, well, carbon labels sound pretty different, and maybe that would get our customers excited and interested in the link between food and planetary health, or human and planetary health. So for us, it was just a way to open up a new dialogue. Of course, it's a ton of work, but you know, frankly, that was our decision maker, or our thought process, and then we just ran with it.
Fantastic. Yeah, I'd love to hear more too about, in that decision-making process, how you sort of settled on carbon specifically. I think that a lot of times the criticism of carbon labeling is that it's not nuanced enough. It doesn't hold enough of the different sort of, whether it's biodiversity or water impact. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about how you decided to focus on carbon, and kind of what you would say to somebody who is maybe critical of carbon labeling as a little bit reductive, I guess.
Yeah, certainly. So we definitely have toyed with presenting our menu with land use, water use, other metrics. But at the end of the day, our customers are here to get lunch and dinner. And you can't bombard people with too much information. I feel that you do need to boil this down to digestible chunks of information. And I think it's a mix of that and wanting, and also what's available. The data, the LCAs on food are pretty robust when it comes to carbon, greenhouse gas emissions. And so it was at least those two considerations, like keep it simple. And this is good data we have on the greenhouse gas emissions of our respective ingredients, our individual ingredients.
Certainly.
Yeah, I would echo what Sandra said. So I think for us, CO2 equivalents started to become really important. One, just in terms of how we clarify with the consumer, because we're in the same space. I mean, when you're in food or when you're in snacking in particular, I mean, people want fun. This is a relaxing experience. If I start to give you 16 different metrics tied to carbon, tied to climate change and environmental health and biodiversity, like, it's tough to engage consumers in that conversation when all they really want is just a tasty snack that delivers on the product expectation. And I think, the other thing that we're really sensitive to, this is just us as an organization, is particularly within packaged foods, I think too often we see this term of sustainability getting so broad that it becomes paralyzing to the organization. It's almost like you can't be real, you can't be doing good unless you check these 37 boxes. And by the time you've checked those 37 boxes, 10 years have passed and you haven't actually made a positive impact. So I think for us, we actually talk about putting on our carbon glasses, because at the end of the day, greenhouse gases is the most direct cause to, or that has the tightest link to climate change. So for us, we're really, really focused on that. Now, with that being said, we don't want to do anything that is actually creating harm or, having a negative impact. We know that by carbon farming, we're actually checking a lot of those other boxes. We're increasing soil health. We're increasing biodiversity within the farm. We're helping with water conservation. Like, all those things are coming along. We're just not trying to overwhelm the consumer with every single checkbox.
Totally. Yeah, I'd love to hear. There's a question in the chat here that I think would fit very well and be a nice segue. What tools do you use to measure and create your carbon label?
Very curious to hear what Jen's doing. On our part, we started this exercise in late 2019, and at the time, I had no budget for this. This was a passion project, and I wasn't really aware of any kind of plug and play tools that I could use on a shoestring or zero budget. So we relied on publicly available databases that contain individual emissions estimates for individual ingredients. So it is out there. And then we built a custom Excel-based tool that put together the cradle to farm gate emissions of our ingredients, along with the miles traveled, which we estimate internally using the data we have from our distributors. And then we put that all together, calculate it for each salad. It was a very laborious, time-intensive process. I am not going to mince words on that. But since then, new startups are emerging that are doing this in a much more plug-and-play fashion, which is fantastic to see.
Yeah, so on our end, laborious is a good word. So we have a little bit of everything. So on farm, we're actually working with some of the world leading soil scientists out there, because you think, well, okay, I will say I thought, because I'm the first to admit that before I got into this, I knew nothing about soil science, and I really didn't know a whole lot about agriculture. So clearly I'm not the R&D person on the team. But as we got into it, I have a whole new appreciation for the biosystem that is soil. So from that standpoint, finding the experts that actually create the model that supports the way the USDA does it and basically supports the back end of every single tool out there. They're out of the University of Colorado. And so that was a key enabler for us. So we worked directly with the team there, who worked directly with the farmers on every single piece of input that happens at that farm this year and for the last 5 years. So like, that's pretty intensive. And then we work directly with our suppliers. I'll tell you, that's been one of the biggest challenges because we tend to be the only one asking our suppliers these questions. So as much as we can get direct first party data, we do. Where that's not possible, where they're not measuring it, we use the standards that are out there. Same thing in terms of miles traveled. So we know where all of our shipments go. It's kind of a combination of putting all those together. And then for us, every single place where you can make an assumption, we just lean in on the conservative side. Because I think, that tends to be one of the big questions too, is everybody uses different models. And so to keep ourselves clean, we just always pick the most conservative when there's a range.
Amazing. And Sandra, I saw you really nodding your head when Jen was talking about suppliers. Do you have something to add about maybe the challenges of like working directly with suppliers and in relation to this?
I relate so much because again, it's just a new endeavor, and asking for the origins of 200 ingredients on a Wednesday afternoon of your supplier, they're not really expecting that. And so, yeah, that's where the elbow grease comes in. I look forward to the day when suppliers are more used to being asked these things, because then that information will be available in their IT systems that are customer facing. It's a lot of work.
Yeah, it's really complex.
I will say one of probably, like, I've had a lot of really neat moments, as we brought Airly to life. And I will say one of the coolest moments I've had is in talking with our head of R&D. I mean, remember, we're a startup, so we don't have a lot of volume to promise anybody. So not only are we asking suppliers for lots of information that nobody else is, we're also not giving them a lot of volume at this point. So we got a lot of, thanks, but no thanks. I will say one of the neatest moments I've had, though, is talking with Chris, our head of R&D. Once we actually launched and suppliers were seeing this out on the market, the same suppliers that wouldn't take our calls are now calling him saying, "That's so cool. We've got some ideas for you." And that's been pretty cool.
Yeah, that's so exciting. I have another question in the chat here that's directed at you, Jen. Related to the removal claim from Airly, and whether that's based on purchasing offsets or if it's based on agricultural practices and sequestering soil or carbon in the soil, or some combination of both. So I'd love to hear from you on that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So the way that we come up with our on-pack claim is we do the full life cycle analysis on the farm level. So I know exactly how much CO2 we're removing at the farm level. We have not yet, although we're working on it, come up with baking that is zero emissions, or transportation that's zero emissions, or packaging that's zero emissions. We're working on it. So to offset the rest of our process and bring us back to that on-farm negative level, we invest in agricultural and forestry projects to offset the rest of the process.
Excellent, thank you. Sandra, you mentioned something before about how a lot of this started as sort of a passion project for you and for JustSalad. And I wonder, I think that's how a lot of these sort of sustainability minded projects get started, especially when it comes to something like carbon labeling. What advice would you give to someone who's, whether they're in the sustainability department of an organization or it's just something that they're passionate about, who's maybe trying to make an argument for carbon labeling in their own organization?
Yeah. So I think that there has to be some alignment with your customer. It was a no-brainer for us, given that we've had well over 1 million uses of our reusable bowl. Like these are customers who have some concern about climate change. I think that it's also it's also good to think about what you're trying to accomplish with the carbon labels. Again, I don't think of just a raw number is where you should be setting your horizon point at. A carbon label is a means to an end. So what are you trying to achieve? For JustSalad, the carbon label is a means to a few ends. It's starting a conversation, because we were early. So for us, that was definitely a goal. Like, let's create a dialogue around the climate impact of food. And then the second thing was, can we use carbon labels to shift diets toward our lower emissions menu items? We do serve chicken on our menu. We do serve cheese. So the carbon labels are an experiment in dietary change, because that is a key lever to reduce the emissions of the food system. We all must eat more plants to get the food system within its planetary boundaries. Right now, the carbon budget of the food system is way out of whack. So I would just say, whatever vertical you're in, like, what are you trying to achieve? Like, finally, maybe it's you want to carbon label your product because you want to change your production processes, not force the consumer to do anything. So I hope that's helpful, but
yeah, absolutely.
that clarity.
Absolutely. Jen, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would just say, you want to be on the right side of change, because eventually this is going to be mainstream. And I do think that, one, consumers remember who went there first, and two, like, I have this kind of passion point, this sense of frustration, because we hear a lot in consumer packaged goods that there's this aspiration to action gap. Like, consumers say one thing, but they do another, and it's almost like they blame the consumer, but I actually turn the finger, I turn the finger right back at us and say, no, consumers are telling us they want one thing, but we clearly haven't given them the right product because they're not buying it. And so if you walk the supermarket store shelves today, like, I would challenge you, if you're an average consumer, how do you pick a climate friendly choice? Like, how in the world would you do that? And so, I don't think that's always going to be the case. And so I think this is one of those places where taking a leadership position puts you on the right side of change, and ultimately makes sense from a bottom line standpoint, because consumers say they want it. They do want it. You just have to deliver it in the right product.
Totally. And I think that if you are someone within an organization that's like advocating for some of these really important changes, tying it to that bottom line and the business imperative is so important. So I'd love to hear kind of maybe some of your measures of success for these labels, and maybe how you've tied business results to these initiatives.
Yeah. We have a couple. So one is the menu mix. If we want to get really data oriented, it's, do we see our climatarian menu, our lowest emissions items, are they making up a larger portion of our menu mix, over our sales mix over time? And I can't tell you that we have affected some dramatic change away from the ever popular chicken Caesar salad with, a dairy-based dressing. And we have customers just rushing in to eat the Tokyo super green salad with tofu, which is one of our climatarian items. No, that it's not, we're not seeing anything super dramatic, but we have seen a bump in the overall composition of our menu mix among climatarian items, and that's good. And so we definitely look at that, but we also look to see when we use the climatarian and carbon labels for promotion. So on Earth Day, we slashed the prices of our salads to reflect their carbon footprint. So a salad with like 0.5 kilograms carbon dioxide equivalent would be $5 for the day instead of $10.89, to match or mirror, not exactly, but to be in alignment with its carbon footprint. And on those days, we see a huge bump, and we also just look at customer feedback, and people tell us that the emails they love the most from JustSalad have to do with these really fascinating, unique promotions. And that's important to us. It's not quantitative data, but it's a qualitative measure of brand love because we're doing something unique.
Yeah, Jen, do you have anything to?
Yeah, I will add kind of two things to complement what Sandra said. So, I mean, we're in a slightly different position in that our entire brand is a big hypothesis. And so we launched with the fundamental idea that there's a huge consumer need and desire for sustainable products, but there's a big fat asterisk next to that, and that is that don't require me to make changes. So when we created Airly, we really created it with the idea that this is a mass appeal brand, no trade-offs. We taste test ourselves against, the market leaders. So the whole idea here is if we can deliver the right product plus this benefit, that'll make the difference when it starts to come to consumers, picking between what in essence are two identical products, and one actually is not only better for you, but also better for the planet. I will say the other thing that probably is more relatable to maybe some of the folks on the call too, that I would say in terms of like selling this within your own organization is, we're a little disruptive group within Post. So we report right into the CEO. And one of the things that, that's allowed me to have visibility to is just how under pressure and how much that's really increased over the last, call it 18 to 24 months, in terms of pressure from investors. So I think as you're selling it within your own organization, I would not underestimate the pressure that the most senior leadership in your company is under, especially if you're a public company, to be able to demonstrate your commitment to ESG goals. And if you're able to actually take that all the way down to your product, you are leading the class there. And I wouldn't underestimate or undersell the value of that.
Absolutely. And I think that we've been talking a lot about the way that these sorts of carbon labeling initiatives can affect consumer behavior, but I'd be interested to hear how carbon labeling and these kinds of transparency initiatives have affected your research and innovation process when it comes to either reformulating or coming up with new formulas. And I know that Jen, your whole line is very much focused on these sort of carbon conscious products. So I'd love to hear from Sandra first, and then Jen, if you have anything to add.
Very simply, it has carbon labeling has added a new dimension to my relationship with our culinary director. And what I mean by that is when he formulates our seasonal menus, the carbon labels are a primary topic of conversation, meaning that we try to stay within a range. We don't want to start sourcing ingredients that are going to exceed like the current range in which our carbon labels sit. And that's great. It's a quantitative way to keep ourselves disciplined around the estimated emissions of our food. And I think that that is the main way that it plays out internally right now.
Jen, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, I think the only thing I would add to that, the nice thing about carbon labeling, we talk about it from a consumer standpoint, but I do actually think it's probably as beneficial or even more so with internally facing organizations, because when you go through that exercise, it forces you to really look at how you make things today and the ingredients that you're using. And I will tell you, we certainly had a lot of ahas as we went through that example. And we've had a lot of folks from our different brands and business units reaching out to us. So I think it's a valuable exercise, period, for an organization to go through. And then the other thing I would build off of what Sandra was saying is, you also have to be really careful in how you apply it. because at the end of the day, it is a balance and a trade-off. Like, we sell cheddar crackers made with real cheese. Clearly, there are today available alternatives to real cheese, but nobody will buy them because they do not taste good. And so, instead, the way we've kind of approached this is, don't let perfection get in the way of progress. And so we're really clear with our consumers where we are in that journey. We use 100% real cheese today. Is that footprint where we want it to be today? No. Are we actively working with a range of dairy farmers to bring that down? Yes. So I think that's the thing that I would add on to it too, is, it's a journey. And so I think there's huge value in knowing where you are today and huge value in knowing where you want to go. And it's actually pretty darn inspirational for your organization, your R&D, your culinary folks, to actually try to figure out how you get from here to there. Like that can actually be some really fun, those can be some fun discussions.
Yeah, and to kind of drill down into that a little bit more, I'd love to hear, so like, sometimes product developers or your culinary team has a really strong background in food science or in recipe development, but maybe not necessarily in sustainability. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about maybe some of the questions or the conversations that you've been having with your teams internally to kind of help them understand their decision-making process and the impacts of the ingredients and formulas that they're choosing. If those are conversations that are going on.
I mean, I can pop in because I think we're pretty unique in our positioning. And so our R&D folks have become, and I'll tell you, like, they weren't experts in this space, but they are now. And I think actually, if you work with a lot of R&D folks, they tend to get really jazzed when you put an interesting question in front of them. So I don't know if maybe it's just the folks on our team, but like that actually is not something people typically ask. And so it's actually been pretty energizing to dig in and start to see those connections.
Yeah. I think that one conversation we're having is something that's been enlightening to people here is that transportation generally, or on average, comprises 10% thereabouts of the total carbon footprint of a food. And so early on, people were like, "Oh, we'll have to go much more local for some ingredients that we can't source locally easily, like romaine lettuce comes from California, for example." And the carbon labeling exercise has shown to me, certainly, and members of the JustSalad team, that it's much more significant what the food is than how many miles it traveled. In other words, you're always better off choosing plants than eating a piece of beef that came from somewhere nearby. So we look at, in our carbon calculator tool, we look at the carbon footprint in terms of percentage transportation, percentage agriculture, and the latter is always higher. So that's been an interesting insight, and that certainly affects how you think about sourcing in certain scenarios.
Definitely. We just had another great question come into the chat. Jen, I know that you touched on this a little bit earlier when you were talking about sort of the lack of a harmonized measure for carbon labeling. And I wonder if either of you want to weigh in about what governmental actions you might like to see in regards to impact labeling in support of startups and business initiatives in the future, if any.
I mean, I don't know that I'm a huge fan of regulations, but I will say in this space, gosh, I wish we had some. Because there's so much variability out there, and because consumers have been burned so many times with greenwashing. Like, I'll tell you, when we went through this process, you almost feel like you're walking through landmines because people do it differently. You, at your heart, want to do what's right. You also don't want to leave yourself open for any kind of well, wait, you're doing it wrong, you know, or you are, but there's no right, you know, like we're still creating this process. So I will say, and especially as we're making claims and as we're making measurements, I think if we can get to a place where there are more standards, one, I think it just helps with folks who are trying to do it right, so that like you're not creating it yourself. You know, there is a standard and you are subscribing to it. And I think, you know, my other fear is we've done this with a tremendous amount of rigor and you know, candidly, and expense. And there's a lot that goes into this. And the thing that keeps me up at night too is if the guy down the street doesn't do that and communicates something incorrectly, you know, you all get painted with that same brush. So I actually am a big proponent of, gosh, can we standardize it? And can we standardize what some of the terms mean? So that we're communicating consistently in the same way.
Yeah, the FTC like green guidelines around how you make environmental claims are pretty broad, and so you know, we certainly look at those. And right now, I think the main guidance is be transparent about how you arrived at this claim or this calculation in the case of carbon labels. And so we try to do that on justsalad.com/carbon label. There is a reason, to Jen's point about standardization, there's not. You have to be clear about the boundaries of your carbon footprint calculation. And we are. Our carbon footprint calculation does not include the estimated emissions from throwing away part of your salad in the garbage, which certainly would contribute to its carbon footprint. So you have to be upfront about that in the absence of any standardization. And I think that you can't compare across concepts. So the next fast casual chain that carbon labels, we would not jump to say, oh, our salads are so much lower in carbon footprint than that chain's, because the calculations might have different boundaries. So I would encourage our customers to look at our carbon labels within the Just Salad system and not make cross comparisons in the absence of the standardization Jen recommends or advocates for.
Yeah, and that's where, like, you know, so much of that context and consumer communication comes into play, where because you are having to come up with a custom and different labeling scheme for whatever works best for your product, which in some ways is great because you get to really prioritize what your, you know, organization wants to work toward. But on the other hand, it requires a lot of heavier lifting on the communication side, I would assume. I'd love to hear a little bit about maybe what have been some of your biggest wins, some of the things that you've been the most proud of, and then maybe also some of your biggest challenges or maybe some pitfalls to avoid for people who are sort of entering this space and hoping to move toward this carbon labeling initiative.
I'd say that I'm proud that we at Just Salad have, I think we played a role in popularizing the concept, and by extension, creating a link in the consumer's mind between food and climate change. I think that is missing right now. And we have made a little bit of a dent maybe, and I'm proud of that. We also were invited to speak on a panel with the US Surgeon General in 2020 when these launched. And that felt good because it did indicate some interest from policymakers. And I think that in the future, some countries are already doing this, but national dietary guidelines might have more explicit reference to planetary health as integral to human health. And it seemed like a little glimmer of hope to be on that panel with the Surgeon General talking about carbon labels that day.
Wow, yeah, that's really exciting.
Yeah, so I would say some of the things that I'm really proud of with Airly, the fact that we made it to shelf was a pretty big accomplishment. I say it tongue in cheek, but Sandra talks about the green guides. They're really vague and they're quite dated. And for anybody who works for a big company, in the consumer packaged goods space, when you are going out and making new claims, when you're going into like a new benefit territory that's not well defined like this, lawyers get really nervous. And it doesn't matter that you're doing the right thing. And it doesn't matter that you have Nobel Prize winning scientists that are helping you with this, and world leaders that are actually in soil scientists and soil science that are helping you with this. It doesn't matter how good your science is, lawyers get nervous. So I think we were just so incredibly proud that we were able to, as a grand experiment, get Airly on the shelf, and very proud of the fact that we have our carbon footprint on pack. Because again, when you are making new claims or you're in a new space, it's just not easy to do when you are, even though we're a little tiny startup, we're owned by a big company who have lawyers. So I think we're very proud of that. And then personally, kind of my proud moments, I will say, when suppliers came back and said, that is so cool, we have ideas for you, was a big one. And I think, for me, one of the other kind of big moments is I've worked on some world leading brands before. I've certainly worked on brands that, inspire a lot of passion. I've never worked on a brand like this, where the energy comes back to you every day. As we've worked with agency partners, because we are small. So, we are dependent on our partners to help us actually get this to market, launch it, and communicate it. And I've never worked on a brand where the energy comes back to you because people are so passionate about gosh, you mean all I have to this actually helps solve a problem. Now, I'm not going to say one box of crackers is going to reverse climate change, but at least if we can help inspire others to see that, well, gosh, if they can be creative in how they farm, what else can we be creative about in the food supply chain? I actually think fashion and health and beauty is probably even ahead of us. There are so many creative solutions that are out there just waiting for us to discover them.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons that we're really excited to have both of you on today, is that because you're leaders, you're really forging a path, and you're both sort of lighthouse brands that can, other people can, other brands, other organizations can look to and say, well, if they can make it work, we can make it work too. And I wonder if Airly, and if this is something that you can speak to or not, whether your larger parent brand is sort of looking to you to kind of spread the type of work that you're doing and this move toward a more carbon negative farming approach.
Oh, I could tell you, I think every single, because we have several different, operating companies, a lot of different brands. I think every single one of them has come up to us and said, okay, tell me more about what you're doing. There's something powerful about just making an idea real. And I don't know if we're going to work. I sure hope, but we just, we launched in May, so it's probably too early to say. But we do consider, and we hope that we're a lighthouse brand, that we inspire not only our parent company, but honestly, everybody else in the category as well. For us, a win is this works and everybody else jumps in too. Because there's no reason that everybody else can't use carbon farming and can't look at what they're doing with maybe a different lens too.
Absolutely. And Sandra, I know that you said that you have definitely seen other people in the restaurant space and maybe even in the salad space who are sort of following suit. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about within your within your reusable bowl program. I think that that's a really good example of the way that regenerative initiatives like this carbon labeling and moving toward less of a supply chain and more of a value cycle. And so I'd love to hear what you think and what role you see carbon or eco-labeling playing in the transition to a more circular economy.
So just 10-second summary of the reusable bowl program. You buy one for $1 at JustSalad, you come back with your reusable bowl. and you receive a free topping with every use. It's a like cute little salad container that lasts for many, many, many uses. I think sure, it could be one day we carbon label our reusable bowls, but on the circular economy side and with our reusable bowls, our focus right now is we have commissioned an LCA of the JustSalad reusable bowl versus disposable salad containers. And in 2022, we'll be able to tell our customers, you save this much in water, carbon emissions, ecotoxicity, and human health impacts. There's a measure for that, but you save this much in natural resources essentially when you choose to reuse versus dispose. And after X number of uses, you've saved this much in emissions, water, and ecotoxicity. So I think it's maybe less about carbon labeling for us in the immediate term on reuse than on providing transparency around what the actual benefits of reuse are. And that's not obvious to everyone. So I'm very excited about that.
Excellent. And so you're talking a little bit about in this LCA, what's next for you and for JustSalad. I'd love to hear from you also, Jen, what's next for Airly and things that you're excited about coming up.
Yeah, sure thing. I will say one thing, just because I forgot to say this, and just for anybody who's on the call who's really trying to advocate and create this within their organization. The one other piece of advice that I should give you is be really careful in who you pick as your third-party LCA provider. Because now that is one thing we stumbled with, because we did a lot of like interviewing like all the big guys out there and the experts. And I will just say, there are a lot of folks out there that will charge a lot of money and take a long time to deliver it. So as you're talking with folks, like interview a lot of third parties out there, because there's a lot of them that you really do not want to partner with. So that I forgot to mention, that is one pitfall or one piece of advice I would give somebody who's just starting this. Yeah, so what's next for Airly? So, our grand experiment worked in terms of we were able to get to climate positive grains. We got there with oats in year one. We got there with wheat in our second harvest year. For us, the sky's the limit in terms of what we can do on farm. So we're continuing to look at other grains. And I will say, as we've been looking at reducing our footprint throughout the entire seed to shelf process, we're actually getting some really exciting things in how we bake. Our head of R&D has been testing out, believe it or not, 2 different no emissions baking processes, which is pretty cool. So I think, for us internally, we're always looking at ways to reduce our footprint. And then hopefully as we're able to build distribution and build a business, you'll start to see more and more from Airly.
Can't wait. So I think I'd like to touch a little bit because we got a couple of questions regarding this in the chat. And I know that you're just talking about vetting an LCA assessment. And I think that this is something that has maybe caused a little bit of hesitation from both organizations and consumers just on how can you make sure that these carbon measurements are accurate? How can you make sure that things aren't being double counted? And so if you could just give like a very basic sort of overview of your understanding of that within your brand.
Oh, my super basic is I would say get out and talk to a lot of people, because for me, it was very valuable. And again, like I am not the science expert, the R&D expert on my team. Like I'm sure folks on my team would have a much more diligent, detailed scientific answer. I will tell you, for me, who didn't have the background, you want to meet with and talk with as many people as possible, because it starts to become really helpful to hear what you hear consistently and what comes across as different answers to the same question as you pose it to different people.
Yeah, with our LCA on the reusable bowl, we worked with a third party, and they are extremely. But what I am happy about is they're extremely rigorous, and once they complete the LCA, they then submit it for a critical review with third-party experts who then determine if it's ISO compliant. So just looking for those signals of robustness are, it's a good place to start.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I think we're coming right up on the end of our time today. So I'd love to give you both an opportunity to just kind of wrap up, talk about anything that you'd like us to check out within your organizations and in your brands. Maybe you could share your favorite thing on the menu or your favorite product in the line, so that people can go out and know exactly what to try first. And if anybody has any last minute questions in the chat, we can try to address those as well. Sandra, do you want to go first and share your favorite salad?
Sure. And also, like, if you're looking for the carbon labels, the easiest way to find them again is justsalad.com/menu. If you want to order from us, go to order.justsalad.com, type in your zip code, and you'll see on the left the Climatarian menu. And I pretty much order from the Climatarian menu every day. My favorite item is Tokyo Super Greens with tofu and Chipotle Cowboy with daring chicken. I am a big eater of plant-based chicken. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Yum, sounds great. Thank you so much. Jen, do you have a favorite product snack in your line?
Well, I will say I'll give a shout out to Sandra, because I don't live in a place where we have the restaurant, but I was in New York City and we had a most delicious lunch at your place. Yeah, so from an Airly standpoint, I will do a shameless plug that if you live in the Midwest, go check it out at Schnucks. If you live down in the South, go check it out at HEB Central Market. We're coming into Giant in the Northeast. Otherwise, it's available at your favorite Amazon or airlyfoods.com. We have both savory and sweet flavors.
Excellent. Well, it is just about lunchtime where I am, so I am really looking forward to having something to eat after listening to you guys talk about those delicious items. Thank you so much again for your time. We really enjoy having you on today, and we hope that all of you in the audience can join us for our next session as well, and make sure to go out and eat a salad and try some Airly snacks. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks,
Leah.
Bye.